slides together like overnight. And the key is you pay absolutely no attention to punctuation, spelling, or grammar, and it just goes great. And I've mastered that. It's called a chair and a bed and a plug-in. Okay, we'll pick up where we left off on maybe a little bit of a humorous note, but not terribly, because this is really, can be very serious. The impact that this can have on our children. I doubt many of us realize what it can do. Here's the example of a young girl that was left far, far too many times with a science teacher. But I'm happy to report, through therapy, she's coming around. She knew I had something of her, she just didn't know what. So I turned it on to your dad and let you off the hook. It is one of my favorite pictures. I'm not a social media guy. I did get on Facebook about 6 years ago when Tom got sick, because that was a good way to keep track. But I take great pride in having very few friends. In fact, I saw on CNN this morning, and then we'll get serious, that they are thinking about merging YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and they will call it U-Twitface. I don't take credit for that. A gentleman by the name of Michael Ramadan, he's a British apologetics. It's just all kinds of things you find when you study for a lesson. Okay. Krabby Maddie is the title there. Her mom had a good caption for this before I leave it. Her caption was, "I love them, but I don't like them." Okay, thank you for being good sports. Seriously, though, our goal is to try to learn and to encourage one another, and sometimes that causes us to scratch a scab or two or examine ourselves internally. It's not intended to make any of us feel bad, but to spur us on to works. That is our goal. And I think, I ran across this, I don't know where it came from, but it seemed to apply to my class. One of the things we want to do is help thinkers believe and help believers think. And most of you are probably believers, so we need to spur ourselves to think. But there are a lot of good thinkers that don't believe, and that is also something that would be a goal of ours. Many of these people that I've quoted and will quote in my subsequent classes, they're not dumb, they're just foolish. And there is a difference. Right? There is a difference. Just a few comments on scientism, since I had that slide and my comments before the break, before the previous class, whenever I was up here last, regarding Josh McDowell. He is 75, if anybody's curious. I just looked that up because he looked old when I saw him. And next. Steven Weinberg, who is not obviously a theist, he is a scientist, says the world needs to wake up from the long nightmare of religion. Anything we scientists can do to weaken the hold of religion should be done and may in fact be our greatest contribution to civilization. Now that's the way many people think. It is not the way all scientists think. It's not the way Mark thinks. It's not the way I think. It's not the way others of you think that are involved in that particular discipline. But it is a very common thought. We need to at least be aware of it. Some of the preconceptions. Richard Dawkins, I quoted him a day or two ago, a very famous atheist, says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Duh. That's a theological term. Francis Crick. You remember Francis? Well, you don't remember him, but you know who he is. He's the DNA man, okay, the double helix man. Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed but evolved. Well, why do you have to keep that in mind if it's rather obvious? Well, you keep it in mind because it's not rather obvious. These men are not near as confident of what they, many of them are not near as confident of what they propose as they might make us think. This is my longest quote. It takes 3 slides for me to put it up there and you be able to read it. We take the side of science. This is, again, a non-believer. He was actually, this came out of a review that he did for one of Carl Sagan's books. We take the side of science in spite of some of the patent absurdity of some of the constructs, in spite of its failures to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of its tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Now, before I go any further, this is 3 pages and there's only 2 periods. Anytime you find someone that doesn't want to use periods, they're trying to make you think they're smarter than they really are. Now, I'm going to go back because I don't expect you to necessarily grasp everything. I was reading it to kind of make that point. He goes on and says, it is not the methods and institutions of science that compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigations and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive and no matter how mystifying. For we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Now, I'm not trying to be pedantic or insult us, but I had to read that a few times and breathe several times to grasp it. What he's saying is, if I grasp what Richard is saying to us, is that we're going to, you can't see, well, you can, we take the side of science in spite of its obvious, sometimes absurdity. Some of its constructs, its extravagant promises, despite its tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated stories, because we have a previous commitment. What he's saying is, we've already made up our minds, so don't confuse us with the facts. Now, he could have said it that way, but it would have not been a long enough sentence, and it would have not published. He goes on and says, it's not the methods and institutions of science that compel us to accept a material explanation. A material explanation is simply an explanation for the world and science that takes God out of it. It just happens. Okay, it's all material physics. That phenomenon. To the contrary, we are forced by our previous conclusions that the world is simply material to create an apparatus, a mindset of investigating in science, and a set of concepts that will produce the answer we want, a material explanation. No matter how illogical or counterintuitive it is, and no matter how mystifying the data is to us, because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. This is a classic. Not only don't confuse me with the facts, it's I've already decided, so now let me make sure the facts support what I decided. Now, we can snicker at that, and that deserves a tad of snicker, but that could also sometimes be applied to our Bible study. Okay, this is the way it is, and I'm all for being steadfast, but if I decide what 1 Timothy says before I study 1 Timothy, then why study 1 Timothy? I'm not asking you to change your thought. I just said 1 Timothy because John was teaching 1 Timothy. So we need to be careful and not apply this false approach to ourselves. But it certainly is a false approach as it relates to our subject matter. I don't know this fellow, Richard Lewontin. I don't know anything about him. But he was doing a review. I want to say for the New York Times, but I'm not sure of that when I read it. And as I said, there's only 2 periods in that, that's worse than me. Now going back to some of what we had kind of left off with, that was just a bit of an insert. We were talking about these 3 movements, and that's when I was commenting on some of Josh McDowell's comments or works. And each one of these progressively elevated man and lowered God. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution really was part and parcel with modernism. Modernism is the idea that man's reasoning and man's technology can bring them to the utopia. Somewhere in the 80s and 90s, maybe late 70s, people decided our technology is not bringing us to a utopia. So science isn't going to bring us there, so let's get there by saying there is no utopia. And that brought us to pluralism or postmodernism. And as I ended, none of these answered the 2 key questions, I think, that people that are searching for meaning ask. Where do we come from? What's our purpose? And where does the universe come from? And that somewhat began to not introduce, because it was 100 years earlier that Darwinianism and evolution was introduced, but it exploded because it allowed modernists to define us without having to include God in the explanation. And that's what I said, Satan has an easy sell, because when you're selling something people want or want to believe, it becomes an easy sell. And it led to the concept or the belief or the disillusionment that we don't need a creator God anymore. And under those theories, that's probably a true statement. It led to the God is dead movement. I don't know when that first appeared. I would say 60s or 70s. I remember when it appeared on Time magazine. I think maybe I was in college, but I'm not sure of that. But you don't hear that phrase quite as much now, but I think it's being lived. And American reasoning today, and not just American, European, whatever, is more tied to the concept that we don't have a creator God than it is to Scripture or the church. That is simply a fact. People look for answers, but they're not. What's that song? Looking for love in all the wrong places. Well, looking for answers in all the wrong places. And that brought us to America's most valued virtue today, I think, is tolerance. Now, I'm not saying that is the most valuable virtue. I'm saying that is America's perception. Charles is going to talk on tolerance tomorrow night, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I'm not going to just make up slides and then not use them. So I will make a couple of comments and then he can straighten it out tomorrow night. I believe there's been a tremendous change in meaning by the term tolerance over the last few decades. Tolerance used to mean what I would take from a passage like Romans 12:18. As much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. That's somewhat common. I need to be tolerant of my neighbor. We need to get along, if that's at all possible. That is what I believe the concept of tolerance used to mean. It has come to mean, don't judge me. It might be true, but not for me. Really what I think it has come to mean is, you not only should accept me, you should accept what I believe. Well, I accept a lot of people that I don't accept what they believe. That's about all I'm going to say on that, and I know Charles will do an eloquent job and may not even go that direction with it. But we are often called intolerant, even though we're living peaceably with men. Well, why are we being called intolerant? It is because we don't accept their values as equal to the values we see in the Bible. And that's the definition, largely, I think, of the word intolerance. This also led to a concept of multiculturalism, and make a few comments on that. I put up there philosophical multiculturalism, Because I don't think multiculturalism is wrong. In fact, I think it's kind of a good thing. We have multiculturalism right here in this auditorium. Different backgrounds, different areas of the country, different genealogical ancestry. I think that's good. I love to go to a Itasca. That's a multicultural congregation. I find that very, very refreshing. We maybe ought to be more like that, but our demographics. But philosophical multiculturalism is different. That's when multiculturalism is applied to the philosophies of each culture. And it says the philosophies of each culture are equally valuable. I think it's good when people from different cultures are equally valuable. And some of our traditions are equally valuable. But our philosophies are not equally valuable. Our philosophies are only valuable when they're biblical worldview philosophies as they guide our lives. Now this has led to several things, and one of them I touched on this morning in Genesis 4, where I talked about that was kind of the beginning of conflict between cultures. We're not told a lot about Enoch's conflict with his culture. We're told a little bit about Noah's conflict with his culture, but it's really dealt with very, very briefly. But the conflicts that we have over many of the things we've been discussing are because of our cultural worldviews are different. One worldview, and this is very important, and I don't know that I will explain it as well as I should, so make me. One worldview is that truth is discovered. It's objective. You've heard other teachers than I talk about objective truth. Objective truth means it is set. It's determined. And it is external. That's my worldview on this issue. I go to the Bible to discover truth. But it's already set, and it's external. It's from God. And that's what I think John 8:32 is alluding to. You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. But there is another worldview or concept that has come out of these movements or these psychological or sociological evolutions that we've been talking about that says truth is created, it's fluid, from your own perspective. Now, in some sense, that's a kind of a highfalutin way of saying, okay, I'll get my truth from the Bible, you get your truth from your personal experience, and that's fine. The problem with getting truth from the personal experience is not only that it's not from the Bible, but your experience has changed. And therefore, your truth changes. This last one that I put up here is really the crux of it. The first worldview believes because it is true. The second worldview feels it is true because they believe it to be true. And what that means is we believe it because it's true, as opposed to feeling that it's true, and therefore that's what I'm going to believe. Because my feelings change all the time. I put a slide up yesterday, I'm in a bad mood. That was a bit of an overstatement, but it wasn't a total overstatement, but I had something on my mind that I wanted to share with you. But I feel different today. Something happened. Okay, you're just going to have to focus on me. I can see it, so it's your problem. What I was saying is when you get this cultural divide, one group feels that truth is discovered. That's the biblical worldview. We discover truth from the Bible and from nature to some extent. You don't learn how to be saved from nature. You just learn that there is a God. The other concept has the idea of truth is created, and that puts the creation of truth in each of our hands. We are not to have faith in order to create truth. We are not to have faith in order to create truth. We are to have truth in order to create faith. That is very important. That's what Paul meant in Romans 10:17. So now faith comes by
hearing,
and hearing by the
Word of God.
Okay. Faith comes from the Word of God. Let me ask you. If somebody asks you, why do you believe the Bible is true? What would you say? You only get 3 or 4 words. Why do you believe the Bible is true? And just because is not a right answer. Well, I caught you off guard. You haven't had a chance to think. Oftentimes people will say, maybe some of us will say, I believe the Bible is true because of my faith. That's a bad answer. It really is not a very good answer. Let me tell you at least why I think it's a bad answer. Because I think it's illogical. If our faith comes from truth, then how come our belief in truth come from our faith? We've got it backwards, I believe. Because faith is not a virtue. Now, I want to be very clearly understood on that. Having faith is not a virtue. If having faith were a virtue, Buddhists would be virtuous because they have faith in Buddhism. Muslims would be virtuous because they have faith in Muhammad. And on and on and on. Faith is not a virtue. It is the object of one's faith that gives virtue. Therefore, faith in Jesus Christ is virtuous. Whereas faith in me or in anybody else here, in a spiritual sense, is not virtuous. Now, I'm not trying to lessen the importance of faith. I'm simply trying to extol that faith has to come from the truth rather than what we consider to be the truth being the source of our faith. And that is a mistake that many in the religious world here in America even are making. I feel good about this, so it must be true. My faith comes from my experience rather than my faith coming from something that the Lord has given to us as being absolutely true. It comes from the idea, and I'm reading a quote that you can't see. It is up, and this has been said in some textbooks that I found. It is up to you, the student, to decide about your own value system, to build your own ethical code. You will have to learn what is right for yourself. Well, I have to decide what is right for myself. That's part of accepting the Scriptures. But I don't have to learn it. And that was a tremendous load off of me. I don't have to sit down at night saying, okay, is stealing wrong? And I list all the pros and cons. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't think I ever really did that. Because God's already told me. I don't sit there at night saying, is cheating on my wife wrong? If you have a biblical worldview, God's taken all the stress out of it. Because He's told us what is right or wrong. Our young people, our students, and some adults are being put in the position of being told they have to decide what's right and wrong. We have to decide what we accept, but God has decided what is right or wrong. So I don't have to do that. That happened to be from the Quest for Excellence, which is the high school textbook on leadership. When we get to Satan's workshop, I think one of Satan's great attack points, and that's the reason for my series of lessons this week, is the changes and his attacks on our culture and on our church. And there's been a decisive break, that has occurred from shared beliefs in the past. And I think those three mood swings, if you will, are behind this break. One of them is secularization, one of them is pluralization, and one of them is privatization. I have used those words, and I think other teachers have used those words this week. But let me very briefly give you what I believe to be a definition or a description of those, because those will be terms that you young people will encounter in your educational process, and older people in your reading process. And I think we need to be able to discuss and debunk as appropriate in our classes. In secularization, it worships the secular. Reason is king. There is nothing greater than our mind. That is the apex. That is the ultimate. And when that is true, religious ideas lose their social significance. Because if our collective minds are the apex, then religion really is not needed. And we lose the sacred. Malcolm Mundridge, some of you I'm sure have read some of his works. I don't agree with all that he has said, but he's done some good things. But I like this quote. We have educated ourselves into imbecility. And we eventually keel over like an old brontosaurus. We've educated, not you, as a nation, we've educated ourselves into idiocy. In many cases, we've outsmarted ourselves. Or we thought we'd become smarter than God. Put on whatever term you want with it. Religious views under secularization, therefore, are often dismissed because society does not feel they deal with it objectively. And society wants us to be honest about it. Well, we want to be honest about it. Have any of you read C.S. Lewis' Pilgrim's Regress? Not to be confused with Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Pilgrim's Regress, which is kind of a takeoff of Bunyan's much earlier Pilgrim's Process, but it's about an individual. His name happened to be John. That's somewhat irrelevant. And he wanders through a variety of differing worldviews, just like Christian in Pilgrim's Progress went through a variety of different issues until he got to the celestial city. Well, in Pilgrim's Regress, John wanders through a variety of worldviews, and he finds absolutely no satisfaction and no answers, which was Lewis's way of saying, you can try them all you want, but they don't make any sense and they're not going to help you. It's a little bit of what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. I tried it all, and what was his conclusion? Fear God and keep his commandments. In pluralization, the second one, and pluralization is a little bit like multiculturalism. It can be good. I like pluralization when it comes to food. That just means we've got a variety. And I like the variety. In language, I kind of enjoy different dialects. I enjoyed fade. To use some French once in a while. That's kind of neat for me. But variety is a wonderful thing. But not when it comes to religion and spirituality. That's when pluralization becomes a problem. When pluralization leads to relativism, that's when we have a problem. And that's where it has in the social. And it is, as I mentioned maybe on day 2, a violation of the law of non-contradiction. John says, I have a blue shirt on. Butch says, you're crazy, it's green. Well, they can't both be right. Now in that example, they're both wrong. Two statements can both be wrong, but two contradictory statements can't both be right. Well, pluralization says whatever you think is right for you, and whatever you think is right for you. Well, you lead to a loss of reason, because there's nothing to base your reason upon. Pluralization takes the position that no one worldview is dominant. Well, you can see the obvious problem that has for a Christian, because we believe the biblical worldview is the dominant or the only one. How do you find foundation in a relativistic age. You can't. Everything is relative. And I think one of the things that we as human beings really want, although much of the world is saying they don't, we want something to sink our teeth in. I like when in Psalms, David just says, the Lord, you are my rock. That gives me something to hold on to. You know how many people don't have anything to hold on to because they don't choose to hold on to anything? I've been married 41 years. There's a lot of wonderful things about being married. But you know one of the nicest things? When I got married, I could come to a meeting like this, and I would know who I got to sit by, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. You guys know what I'm saying. Okay, where's she at now? Oh, no. They're sitting with him. I mean, that's part of it, but I went to a lot of meetings as a teenager that I didn't get a lot out of other than where's she at? Now she's my rock. She's my rock. Some of you knew my dad before he died, and this is kind of a funny story on him. He would get kind of absent-minded. Mom was sitting about where Steve Wright was, and another lady was sitting where Mike was, and Dad wasn't paying any attention. He sat down by the wrong woman. The whole place just exploded with laughter. And his loss of hair allowed him to show his blush all the way up. But isn't it nice, men and women, to kind of know that? Because it's no longer relativistic, or at least it shouldn't be relativistic. Oh, these are great slides. I wish you could see them. This is some of my best work. Well, seriously, that was serious, but more seriously, pluralism implodes under its own weight of its own contradictions because two opposing views can't both be right. That's second grade logic, I think. Privatization, and this is an interesting one because it does affect the church. And I imagine, John, I was back there trying to figure out just exactly what order to do. So I was working last hour, I will admit that. But I think he was in maybe chapter 3, so you're getting into elders and deacons and that kind of stuff. Privatization is the concept of keep your beliefs private. It's my business, it's your business, but don't bother me. Now, in a secular sense, we find that in our work and our school. And I mentioned this. You can sing, pray, and worship all you want, just don't bring it to work, bring it to school, or expose me to it. So the world, Pleasant Hill, is quite happy for us to be in this building doing this. But that's different than knocking on their doors and trying to take some of this to them. No prayer, no signs, or discourse in public. I know some of you have told me that you've been asked to remove your Bibles from off your desk or little plaques. That's probably happened. It did never happen to me, but it's been a while since I was in the corporate world. The impact I think this can have on the church if we're not careful, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about it if time allows when I'm talking about Satan's attack on the church. Have you ever had someone in the church say to you as an elder or just you as a brother or sister, that's my business, but maybe they didn't use those words. But we in the church can get caught up in privatization now. There is nobody in this auditorium that is more private, that likes their privacy more than I do. Trust me. This is just a facade. But we're a family. And in that sense, my business is your business is my business when it is of a spiritual nature. When it is of a spiritual nature. And I know many times elders have been kind of had the door shut on their face. I remember a story, I won't tell you where it happened. An elder went to go visit a member, a man and a woman who were members, and they had been negligent. And the man excused himself, said, I need to go to the restroom. Well, that sounds reasonable. And this guy and this man's wife sat in the living room, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes. They went and checked, and the guy climbed out the bathroom window, and he was gone. Now, that's an extreme. But I do believe it is our elders' business when it comes to our spiritual life. Now, there is a balance between being nosy, you and I, and being concerned. But privatization can be a hindrance even within the church if we take it to the extent that it's inappropriate. The search for meaning is key for humanity. I believe that's what we all are searching for, meaning. As Christians, we get it from our Christianity. Most people get it from things like fame, success, or wealth, or notoriety, but it never brings meaning, and that's why those people, many times wealthy celebrities, commit suicide. If fame, success, wealth, and notoriety brought meaning, then why would a star athlete or a movie actor end their life? Well, it's because it doesn't bring meaning. Jesus was right. How about that? To find oneself, one must first lose oneself. That's a very key thing. And there are consequences to all of this. In your notebooks, and I've got about 9 minutes. I listed 3 types of consequences of culture. I don't need to spend a lot of time on these. You may not be familiar with them. I put them in there for you to analyze or think about. You'll know them, but you may not know them by these things. One of them is theonomy, one of them is heteronomy, and one of them is autonomy. You're more familiar with the latter one, autonomy. But theonomy is really the one that I think we want. Theo comes from the word God. Nomos or nami comes from the word law. And a theonomic culture is simply one that literally adheres to God's law. It's the state of being governed by God. If a culture is theonomous, it is governed by God. And that's what we wish we had. I hope that's what the church is. That's what the church has to be, or unless the candlestick is removed and it is no longer the church. The other one is heteronomy, and you can probably gather that from some of your knowledge. It literally means others' law. Hetero meaning others. Nami still being law. And it's the system of ethics that's based not on one's own moral principles, but on the tenets taken from a different sphere of social life. In other words, we get our values from the people around us, rather than in a theonomy issue, we get our values from God. Well, that is only good if you're surrounded by godly people, and then you still ought to get them from God. It's the concept of being ruled or swayed by other men. Well, we're all ruled or swayed somewhat by other men, but we need to have a theonomic bearing. The last one that is listed there is autonomy. And I think that it's used in different ways, but in this way it literally means self-law. It's a culture or it's an individual who's living one's life according to one's own reason and not the product of external forces, whether they be God or other people. And obviously that is kind of a pluralistic approach to life. There are several societal disillusionments that have come from all of this. You can imagine some of them, but some of them really stuck out to me, so let me just go with them. Number one of the disillusionments that society has with these theories is the failure of success. Success doesn't make people happy. I ran across a middle class definition, a definition of the middle class. It's the ability to drive this year's car wearing last year's suits and living off of next year's income. And there's some truth to that. I think most of us are middle class and may not totally apply to that. But our definition of success, and this is an attack point by Satan, our definition of what is successful has gotten so distorted that we're going to be disillusioned. How does your community decide who's successful? By who goes to church? By who's baptized? By who is a godly person? No, it probably has to do with the square footage of their house, the newness of their car, and the clothes they wear. We are such a superficial people. Another disillusionment would be our disillusionment with technology. Now, based on losing my PowerPoint, or Mark, one of us, something happened. Maybe it was an attack. But I have technology. I've got my 2 laptops, my desktop, my iPad, my iPhone. So I don't know how to use them, but I got them. Because you're supposed to have them. I've resisted getting one of those belt things that I carry my phone in. I don't know, that just looked like what they used to put flyers in when I was in school. But one of the societal disillusionments is the imminency of technology. Technology advancements have not reduced our problems one single bit. Period. They have exchanged old problems for new problems. Every problem technology solves, it simply creates another one. Right here. This technology allowed you in the back to read it until it didn't work. And now we got another problem. And we'll probably figure it out. We will figure it out. Someone will figure it out. Just give me an example. I don't know. I don't think I ever did use it. Maybe you ladies wouldn't mind. How many of you use hairspray? Oh, raise them big. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, how many of you men use hairspray? Now, you should be ashamed. I said hairspray, not hair polish. You misunderstood me, Mark. Okay. Now, this is presented to me as an hairspray solves a problem. Your hair doesn't blow all over. But then what do they tell us? It makes holes in the ozone layer. So we solve blowing hair, and now we're going to be irradiated with cancer. Now, I don't know that I believe that, but it's an example. We solve one problem, only create another one. So technology is not the long-term solution. It's good, it makes things more convenient. But my grandparents probably lived longer than I'll live, and I got a lot more technology than they got. So there is a societal disillusionment, and that's what brought postmodernism on. Because they said technology is not going to solve it, so let's just say there are no problems and everybody's beliefs are the same. There's one more that I want to share, and then we will quit. This is called philosophical disenchantment. And what I mean by philosophical disenchantment is if you do not have a biblical worldview, you believe everything is just physical, because there is no real spiritual. And if you believe everything is material, then your philosophy has to be what they call philosophical materialism. Even your philosophy has to be materialistic, if that's all there is. Philosophy then becomes a system of thought that can only be believed by what you see. Because materialistic and physical is all there really is. If that is true, if you only believe what you see, you can no longer see the thought that you now believe. And once again, we've got a crash. It just crashes down on ourselves. Now, that last one is kind of convoluted, but it's right. If you only believe what you see, you can no longer see the thought that you're having that you say you believe. So what do you believe? And it just crashes down on itself. So many times, and Charles and I had just a passing comment the other day, these are so easily debunked, that they are so enticingly dressed for people to accept, and young and old or whatever can leave the faith because of it. Okay. I appreciate your patience always. I appreciate it particularly the last few minutes, because it is harder to follow when it's not up there. But that may not have... shoot, I can't even show you lunch, can I? This is not good. It's really good lunch. Let me tell you about lunch. It's probably just as well that you can't see this one. because when I put it on last night, I looked at that and I said, is that getting ready to go down? Or has that already gone down and come back up? I'll save that one. Okay, are there any, we are to lunchtime. Are there, let's see, I've got one and then he's got one that I don't want to make. No, I'm not being serious. I can't read it.
There's 2 cars parked over here next door. They are expecting a delivery truck. So there's one with Kansas plate.
Okay, and one's a dark blue.
You need to move if you want to get out.
Okay, well there's a dark blue S10 is one of them too. So if they belong to you in a timely manner, move them. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I really couldn't read. Before I give it to Mark, I've been told that there are probably strombolis, if you know what that is, for like 30 or 40 people downstairs if you want to avail yourself of that. But in general, there's not a big lunch downstairs. Mark.
Ooh, that is good. Yeah, that was one of my announcements. Stromboli for lunch. If you know what Stromboli is, you might want some of that. About 40 people or so. The other thing is after class, in Tad's class downstairs on relationships, they're getting to the point of relationships and dating, and he's going to be discussing some what might be physical appropriateness during dating. And so there's some young people in the class, and so if you're a parent and you kind of want to know a little bit more about what might be physical appropriate during dating, then yeah, you might want to talk to Tad and whether or not you want your child down there during that time or however. So just if you have any questions about that, he just wanted that to be put out there so you knew kind of what the topic was going to be. And if you have any questions, you can see Tad maybe right here before lunch. Did you call someone? Okay. Let's go ahead and stay and ask Don Burke to offer. Thank you so much.